Bring in show music, please.
Hi, I'm CNBC producer Katie Kramer. Today on Squawk Pod, where humans end and AI begins. Google's former CEO Eric Schmidt has a new book on artificial intelligence and preserving human dignity in technology.
Human evolution will now be determined not by humans, but by human and computer.
And speaking of Google, the Department of Justice is taking aim at big tech for being too big.
I've never agreed with the use of antitrust to deal with the large tech companies. I think that if you want to deal with them, then regulate them.
An escalation in the Russia-Ukraine war.
Is a win possible by either side? A total
No.
Plus, what do a long-simmering feud, SNL, and apple pie have in common?
It's turned out to be much better than I thought.
Martha Stewart, a new documentary on Netflix, an old beef, and a new set of recipes. Martha's 100th book.
We're celebrating 100, but it's not like the 100th and the final.
Oh, gosh, no. The 101st is already done. It's almost at the printer.
All that and much more this Wednesday, November 19th, 2024. Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand Becky by in 3, 2, 1. Cue it, please.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. We are live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick, along with Joe Kernan and Andrew Ross Sorkin.
This morning's breaking news and the war in Ukraine. A Bloomberg report citing Ukrainian military officials saying the country's armed forces carried out their first strike in a border region with Russian territory using U.S.-supplied long-range missiles. This comes as Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a revised doctrine. Now that lowers the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. Putin saying that any conventional attack on Russia by any nation supported by a nuclear power will be considered a joint attack on his country. He will continue to monitor the situation and bring, or I shouldn't say he will, we will continue to monitor the situation and bring you them as we get those updates as we're all trying to sort through.
Yeah, it wasn't
what exactly just happened.
It wasn't a border it was within Russia.
75 miles into it.
Into Russia. So based on what he said, that would theoretically qualify. I don't think
the change they made in the doctrine.
It's saber rattling.
It's saber rattling, but probably something that's ratcheted up. I think if you look at this is the potential final countdown for the final weeks of this fighting if President Trump does what he said he was going to do and tries to resolve this.
Which suddenly Europe is on board with. But it would be nice if this. I don't know what the real, like Leisman always talks about a terminal point. What's the, other than some type of negotiated settlement where some land is exchanged, what is the terminal settlement?
I don't know, but you can imagine that
utter
both
defeat
sides,
of Ukraine?
Both sides are ramping this up because they need to make sure they have the best negotiating position they have. They can possibly get before any of this happens so that they can say, here's where the line begins and we need to negotiate from there.
Is a win possible by either side? A total...
No.
Everyone so knows. Then we know that we're headed this way probably. So I thought this had something to do with North Korea too.
It did. Part of the Biden administration is allowing this because North Korea has sent in soldiers to be fighting on the Ukrainian side of things. Right. What the change in the doctrine is originally it was the Russian doctrine said that if you are a non-nuclear country attacking, they cannot use nuclear weapons on this. But now the doctrine says that if you are a non-nuclear country that is being supported by a nuclear country,
right.
The United States, then that changes the rules of engagement.
And they hold you, and the question is, do they hold you to account? And
right.
The question is, how do they hold you to account?
Correct.
I guess you're right, 200 points.
It's not even 0.6%, because 200 points is not what it used to be on the Dow when you're talking about the Dow above 43,000. However, we did notice an immediate drop in the futures, and when we see things like that, we try and explain why. This is...
Get to
President. Where did Bitcoin go, by the way?
Bitcoin is 90 plus. I don't know whether
that has always been the sort of risk on, risk off asset.
Same thing with Treasury yields.
No, but it's up.
Treasury yields down, so you could say that is people going into a safety trade.
Let's get back to what's happening in this country. President-elect Trump's transition team and more picks for his incoming administration. Megan Casella joins us now with more. Good morning.
Hey, good morning to you, Joe, from West Palm Beach, where we did get some new news overnight in the cabinet appointment department. Trump tapping Sean Duffy, the former Wisconsin congressman, current Fox Business News host, to be his transportation secretary. That would put him atop of the agency's roughly $100 billion budget, but will also put him in charge of overseeing all of the infrastructure money passed in the Biden administration that some Republicans have talked about rescinding to help pay for their agenda next year. So one thing to watch in his agency if he is confirmed, and that does put us well past halfway through filling out this cabinet. But of course, the biggest position still left unfilled is the Treasury Secretary, and all eyes down here on that position and that fight, which has really spilled into public view in recent days. An expanded pool of candidates now on the table, all familiar names to you guys, to all of us at this point. But the key to watch with this slate of Treasury Secretary picks, and one thing that I'm told has made this decision a little bit harder, is that the president-elect seems to be weighing two key considerations for this one that are sometimes in conflict with each other. He wants to make sure he taps someone that is fully committed to his economic agenda, especially on the tariffs front, but he also wants to choose someone who Wall Street and the markets will like. He doesn't want to disrupt the market rally and the positivity that we've seen since he was elected. So that's something that's keep in mind when we see someone like Scott Bessent, considered a favorite on Wall Street, putting an op-ed in Fox News late last week, really celebrating tariffs as a policy tool, trying to walk back some previous comments he made about implementing them in a gradual way or being more measured with them, really trying to be a little bit more of a forceful supporter there. And it's also something that could come up with Kevin Warsh, the former Fed governor, who at least for the past decade or so has written several times about sort of a more measured trade stance, being more of a free trader. In 2018, in Trump's first term, he wrote in the Wall Street Journal about economic isolationism and weakening the dollar, something that President Trump has showed he might be favorable to, saying that those would harm the economy and be ill-advised. So that's just something to keep in mind, because then on the other end of that spectrum, he can't lean too hard into someone who's particularly hawkish on trade, someone like Robert Lighthizer. The Times and others are now reporting is out of the running for Treasury Secretary because of the way that, because of his trade stance, that would go over with Wall Street. So, Joe, just something to keep in mind, something the president-elect is keeping in mind as he tries to make that decision this week. Joe?
Those are incongruous. They want someone, the president wants someone who will be totally on board with what he wants to do, which may or may not please the market. So Lighthizer totally on board with the tariffs, but he's very concerned with continuing. He loves a rising stock market. So then you'd have to ask yourself, well, if you love a rising stock market, are you sure that you want tariffs across the board? So that begs the question.
You have to find someone who really strikes the balance, I would say. Lighthizer, very likely, I would be very surprised if he doesn't end up in this administration somewhere, just probably not in that Treasury position. But remember how things went with Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin in the first term, a very stable position. Mnuchin was there all 4 years. But in hindsight, Trump and Lighthizer have said that sort of the Goldman wing, quote unquote, of the administration may have slow-walked aspects of the trade agenda at some point. So trying to be more balanced. And I would also say, Joe, that I wouldn't be surprised either if new names continue to emerge in this Treasury Secretary fight. Everyone I've talked to says this is up to the president-elect alone, as all of these positions are, but it just means that there's a real lack of clarity at this point, that they're sort of calling around, and we just don't know who it's going to be yet.
Yeah, and it's also the short-term, long-term implications. I mean, if you talk to investors, big-time investors on Wall Street, they would love to see someone like a Kevin Warsh, who is very concerned about the long-term, making sure you manage the reaction of the Treasury markets to our growing borrowing needs.
I don't know whether, taking the punch bowl away qualifies for being really friendly to the markets, though, because he.
Well, it's short-term versus long-term, right? It's short-term. You want to make sure the short-term euphoria isn't overwhelmed by long-term concerns, and that's a tricky task. Yeah.
And maybe there's a way to have a more measured trade stance too. Bessent talked about this in his op-ed. He actually talked about tariffs as a strategic tool, and it was, if you read between the lines, it looked to me like a way that he was trying to say, yes, let's use tariffs, yes, let's do it, but let's also not maybe do a universal baseline tariff that stays in place forever. Maybe there's some gray area that we can navigate.
Which is, by the way, the same thing that Howard Lutnick said when he was on set with us, sort of. He said negotiating tool, right?
Yeah.
That is what he said.
Exactly. Lutnick may now be more out to pasture for other reasons. The reporting is that he's sort of gotten on Trump's bad side by not putting more names in front of him for Treasury in the first place and campaigning too hard himself. So maybe it's not his trade stance that disqualifies him. Maybe it's more personal reasons there.
Negotiating tools for some tariffs that weren't actually in place in the countries that we're negotiating against. So that was.
That is what he said.
And reports say that DOJ antitrust officials plan to ask a judge to force Alphabet's Google to sell off its Chrome browser. That's according to multiple reports. And the judge ruled in August that Google illegally monopolized the search market. Coming up when we return, former Google chairman and CEO Eric Schmidt is going to join us right here on the Squawk set. We're coming right back after this.
This is Squawk Pod.
Up and Andrew, Q.
Welcome back to Squawk Box. Our next guest is a known leader in the tech industry who's going to be weighing in on so many issues, regulation under Trump, administration, and so much more. But he's got a new book out. Eric Schmidt is here, former Google chairman and CEO. His book is out today. It is called Genesis: Artificial Intelligence, Hope, and the Human Spirit. And most interestingly, it is worth noting that you have two co-authors, but one of whom is Henry Kissinger. And this was one of the last things he worked on before he passed away.
It's Dr. Kissinger's last book. And of course, we miss him every day, all of us who knew him. But he got very, very concerned about the impact of AI on society. He didn't really understand AI, but he figured it out. But the biggest issue is the impact on our human dignity. How do we perceive ourselves? Are we human? Are we the dogs to the computers, or are the computers under our control?
I want to get into all of that. I do want to ask you, though, a whole bunch of questions just about the here and now, if you'd indulge me. We were just talking about this report that came out last night about the potential for your former employer to be forced to push Chrome outside of Google and effectively to spin that business off or break it up. What do you think of that? And what do you think do you think there is a regulatory need to do something at Google?
Well, a lot of this has to do with the antitrust activities, right, which were initiated by President Trump in his first term and continued by Biden. I've never agreed with the use of antitrust to deal with the large tech companies. I think that if you want to deal with them, then regulate them, but do it in a fair way, do it in an open way, and have it apply to everybody.
So when you look at but the impact of taking Chrome out of Google, you think it would be what?
Well, Chrome itself doesn't make any money. What they're referring to is the fact that the use of Chrome means much higher gross margins than shared browsers.
Right.
But again, to me, those are business decisions. I just don't agree with the government's attitude in this area.
Do you think that the whole antitrust game is going to change under Trump as it relates to Google, as it relates to Apple? There was a report out recently that they may not go after Apple anymore. I mean, do you think that there's a whole new sort of sea change here?
Well, Lena Khan, who is the executive here in the government, will clearly be leaving, and she pushed a whole bunch of new theories about how antitrust would work, which we'll see if they're proven over time. The important thing from my perspective is these antitrust efforts don't work. If you want to regulate, do it in a precise way, do it in such a way that you understand your outcomes. Don't play other games. Now, these companies, by the way, as their defender, are under enormous pressure from their employees, from lawsuits and so forth. This is just another regulatory pressure on them.
But the Department of Justice began this under the first Trump administration.
That is correct.
This is not something that's out there, and there have been other companies from Microsoft to AT&T and others who have gotten broken up over the years. I mean,
well, Microsoft was not broken up.
It had to deal with. It wasn't broken up. It had to deal with the separation of and dealing with all the terms the government placed on it.
And what happened was that set Microsoft back about 10 years.
Yeah, Bill Gates has blamed it for why.
But from my perspective, breaking up these companies is not going to fundamentally address the annoyance that you have with them. They're vertically integrated, but the fact of the matter is, I worked a lot with European Union trying to slow down their regulation. In every move they suggested, Google ultimately found other ways of being successful in business. And so it's much more subtle. The companies are vertically integrated in a way where they're actually trying to deliver an integrated experience. By taking something, I'll give you an example with Apple. There was a proposal to take the App Store away from Apple. Well, the App Store is an integral experience for the user. So it's a degradation of the user experience. Now, for what, right? You really think that people want to then download their own app store and deal with the problems of security and so forth? There have to be other solutions.
Let me bring this back to AI and maybe then connect it back to the book. But here's a question about the search business. So for a very long time at Google, search was the business. It still is 90%, and it does have a 90% market share for that business if you define search as the sort of blue link economy. The question right now is all of a sudden we're talking about AI, and we had the CEO of Perplexity on just yesterday. I'm going to be seeing Sam Altman in a couple weeks at OpenAI. Amazon is trying to build its own system. Everybody is trying to do something. And so the question is, do you define the marketplace for search as the blue link economy and what you put into your search bar today as that is the size of the market, or is the size of the search market a very different market because people are either using these other AI services and that becomes search, or even when you go to search on an Amazon or you search on Instagram or whatever, that you should think about that as a search product?
Usually when people are talking about these search issues, what they're really talking is the ads business, not the searches themselves. On the searches will go from blue links and the queries and so forth to answering the question, which has always been the goal of Google and Google's competitors. I just don't see that regulating the link placement and the other things, which is what regulators try to do, will essentially solve the problem. These products will get turned over to give you much better coaching, much better ideas, to be much better integrated. There will be issues around who is dominant there. But remember, for the last year, there was a great deal of criticism of Google that they were late into this. Now, Google has come back with Gemini 1.5, which is really, really good. So that's evidence of competition, which is a key component in an antitrust.
Do you think it will change? Meaning, do you think 5 years from now there will be a 90% market share in search, or do you think that other people will emerge?
Well, my own view is that search will change, and that the term search, you won't be searching, you'll be existing. We talk in the book a lot about how human evolution will now be determined not by humans, but by human and computer. And humans, we know, are very different. They have different preferences, the way they consume information. So my own view is that you'll have lots of interesting choices at this next layer, but that they're well above the blue link economy that you talked about.
Getting back to the book and this idea of dignity, our own dignity, and us all being human, and having a purpose. How concerned are you that we won't have a purpose? And that if you have a machine that you think is smarter than you, that and by the way, I think the machine is smarter than I am today, to be perfectly blunt about it.
I don't think so.
In many ways, it's smarter than I am. It obviously, I don't think it can think as well as I can about certain things. It has a lot more knowledge than I'll ever have.
So does a library, but it doesn't,
But what do you think about that, 5-10 years from now?
Speak for yourself.
Humans are not going away. There's a long pattern of business efficiencies, taking the drudgery, the bad jobs, the unpleasant jobs, the dangerous jobs, and eliminating them and allow humans to do what we prefer to do, which is be creative and use our human judgment. It will take a long time for those human functions to go away, if ever. The important thing about what's happening is if business efficiency that you're seeing from AI is replacing low-level, tedious jobs. We have an issue that those people will need a new place to work because human dignity involves working.
Do you think we'll need to make strides in neurology to ever get to that point for machines, or do you think just raw size of the data that a machine assimilates will eventually result in sentience? Because we are nowhere near understanding how you see green or feel love or the spirit of humans. We have no idea how that happens neuronally.
Well, we can build computers that can appear to have consciousness, but they don't really have it. And the reason we know that
do we need to understand the brain before we get to that point?
We will, and I personally
don't know if we ever will.
We certainly are not going to do it in our lifetime.
No.
Talking about in our lifetime, there's now a question in the AI community that seems to have bubbled up in the last month or so about whether the industry is hitting a, quote, wall in terms of just how fast the scaling capabilities are of AI. Sam Altman put out a tweet saying there is no wall. Others have said there is a wall or at least a slowdown of some sort. What do you think is really happening?
So there's been a slope like this, which is they're called the scaling laws, which means more hardware, more data, you get these emergent behaviors, you get these incredible abilities, which you can see today from the various competitors, Gemini, OpenAI, Claude, a few others. They're really impressive. There's some evidence in the last month or two that it's getting harder and harder to get to the next tranche. My own view is that those are just adjustments in the path. That, for example, it's harder to find new data, right? Because a lot of the data has been searched. On the other hand, you have huge groups that are developing new algorithms. The pace is not slowing, but the nature of the pace may change as a result.
And then the other question I was asking, this is an enterprise question, probably for a lot of our audience. A lot of folks have taken on and used Microsoft Copilot now. And there have been a whole bunch of stories recently and Mark Benioff is actually sort of used it to his benefit to say, you know what, all of this stuff not totally ready for prime time yet. That employees say they like it to some degree, but then they often complain that they don't feel like they're getting the value out of it yet, that it's more of a party trick than it is something that's actually helping them in their day-to-day. What do you think about that?
So there's evidence that a programmer, roughly half their code is written by the programmer and half of it is written by AI. Now, if you ask the programmer, we being human,
right,
the programmer will say, well, I wrote all of it and the computer helped. If you ask the computer, would the computer say, well, he helped me, but I really wrote it? We don't really know. The important point is this is the collaboration between the two. I would argue that that's an improvement in efficiency and productivity, which is a good thing.
So will there be a quantum or a gradual advance?
It looks so far exponential, which from your perspective means sort of gradual, like a slope. There are people who believe, I call this the San Francisco school because they're all in San Francisco at the moment, where the slope will actually accelerate, that is the quantum change that you're describing, when we invent scientists that are themselves AIs and not human. And there's a belief that that will occur within this next 3 to 5 years. And
because
think about
it. We can't look at ourselves. We need to create something that can look at us.
Well, a lot of these things are math. Right. And frankly, computers are going to get really, really good at math with these new tools. So imagine instead of having 1,000 AI scientists, you have 100,000, human scientists, you have 100,000 AI scientists. Wouldn't that be interesting? That's a belief.
Eric, I got one final one for you, and I know we got to go. Data leakage. So that's the other big issue that I think a lot of the big enterprises are worried about right now. It's actually something that is in a number of the stories about Copilot at the moment, which is that, everybody thinks they've siloed all of their data. And yeah, sure, on Workday or one of these systems, most people couldn't get to salaries or other information because they didn't know how to get. But if you now have a OpenAI or a Copilot or Gemini where you can just type in what you want to see, sometimes it's now unearthing and finding things internally inside the enterprise that employees are not supposed to see, or that is sort of scheduled for a certain group of people, but other. How hard is it going to be long term for businesses to actually get their data siloed in the right way?
Those are just examples of bad engineering. When Google showed up, but when we had enterprise search, we had the same concerns. Just fix it, right? These are poorly designed systems, and one of the things about AI is that it can rearrange your system. It can tell you where the vulnerabilities are. If you want to know something to worry about these models being stolen. That's what I worry about, that somebody evil or malicious will take them and use them for bad things.
The large language models.
Exactly.
What about like the ones that are open source? I mean, anybody can steal that.
Well, they're designed to be delivered,
right,
but they have also been checked by the deliverer before they're made open.
Eric Schmidt, the book is called Genesis, Artificial Intelligence, Hope, and Human Spirit.
Thank you.
It's great to see you this morning. Thank you.
Still to come on Squawk Pod, the 20 years long spat that now involves two journalists, Charli XCX and Martha Stewart. Saturday Night Live and a Netflix documentary collide on Squawk Box, with Martha Stewart herself setting the record straight.
I mentioned that she's dead, and I was happy that she was dead. Well, I wasn't talking about Andrea Pizer, by the way.
If you haven't seen the Martha doc yet, don't worry, we'll explain it all right after this. Welcome back to Squawk Pod. I'm producer Katie Kramer. If you've been on Netflix recently, you might have noticed the documentary Martha about the rise, fall, and rise again of the icon Martha Stewart. It's on so many people's queues, in fact, that I got a mention on Saturday Night Live last weekend. Well, some of the behind-the-scenes drama did. Stick with me here. There are a couple of pop culture references to cover. In the documentary, Martha fires at a journalist, unnamed, for coverage of Stewart's 2004 fraud trial. And Martha says said journalist is dead, and Martha herself not sad about it. So, New York Post columnist Andrea Pizer, who did cover the trial 20 years ago, posted on X after watching the documentary, "I'm alive." She added an expletive that I won't, but you can look it up. Well, that was brat. According to Charli XCX, whose album celebrating sassiness got the word brat trending over the summer, the feud between the domestic diva and the journalist made it to Charli's monologue on Saturday Night Live, aired by our parent company, NBC.
When that exact journalist responded and said, "Hey, I'm alive," that is extremely bad.
Brat or not, Martha Stewart also has published her 100th book. 100, a cookbook, of course. Here's our Andrew Ross Sorkin kicking off a conversation with Martha Stewart.
Martha, it is great to see you, and congratulations, 100 books.
Yeah,
Can you remember all of them?
I have to catch up to Danielle Steele. She's done 200.
How different do you think it is when you think about when you wrote the first one and today, just given the age of social media, even the role of books in our world today, how different really is it?
It's a very different world. You can access recipes online so easily nowadays. It's just an incredibly different thing. But books still, I like books. I think so many people in the kitchen like cookbooks. They like to hold the book. They like to open it on the counter. And this book is a very usable, workable book. And people are responding very favorably. We were in Charleston over the weekend, and 1,200 people came to Gaillard Hall and held up their books. It was quite amazing and quite nice to see that kind of interest in the printed word.
But we're agreeing this is not the last book. I know we're celebrating 100, but it's not like the 100th and the final.
Oh, gosh, no. The 101st is already done. It's almost at the printer. And that is a gardening handbook, which is beautiful. And then I'm already working on my autobiography, and I'm working on a book about my houses and a book about gardening, vegetable gardening, organically, and many, many, many more, I hope. I like to write. It's a nice thing to do.
Well, talking about your autobiography, let's talk about the film version of that, because a lot of us have been watching you on Netflix, and I'm so curious what you actually think about this documentary. I've read some of the things you've said, but now that I have an opportunity to actually talk to you about it and have watched it myself, what's your true takeaway here?
What did you think?
I liked it. I know that you don't like certain parts of it. And I get that. I totally get that. But I thought in the end that I felt like I walked away loving you even more, to be honest with you. So I didn't think even the parts that you probably, I could feel the speed bumps for you. I knew where you were probably like, I don't love that. But,
it's turned out to be much better than I thought. It was a slightly painful process to open up as I did to R.J. Cutler. And it was, and it's the time of life to do that, though. I mean, it's about time I spoke out a little bit about my personal life. But the response, especially of young people, young women, love it. They love it. I think it's giving them some strength. It's giving them some energy. It's giving them a way to think about their future. And that makes me very happy. There's still more to tell, and that's the documentary, and possibly a Martha 2 documentary. That would be fun to do. And I'm very excited that my life has taken this turn where people are actually responding to a woman's story.
Right. How much do you think your opinion has changed because of the reaction? So I think one of the things that's so interesting oftentimes is people read a book about themselves or watch a film about themselves by themselves before it's out to the public. And they feel every speed bump, they think it's terrible. Invariably, you think it's terrible. And then it gets out in the wild, and you get calls from all sorts of people saying, Martha, isn't that great? And then, right?
Well, my friend Joel Silver, the movie director and producer, he called me screaming, how did I let that happen? It was the most horrible thing he ever saw. And I love that about him. He is so outspoken. And then somebody else, Ryan Murphy, called. He said he loved it. So everybody has an opinion, and I love that they have opinions about it. And I listen very carefully, because next time, Martha 2, if there ever is one, will be even better and probably more interesting and more helpful to the viewer than this one.
Would it be a different team that did Martha 2?
Oh, I don't know yet.
Okay, just thinking about.
I think so. I like different music. I'm an editor, really and truly, and you never saw a repetition in my magazine, so I wouldn't want to repeat.
Right.
We used a different photographer every year for 4th of July, for example. Repetition is not my thing.
Martha, did you see SNL this weekend?
I did. I thought it was hysterical.
You know where I'm going with
I'm
this.
glad you brought it up. Can I straighten out one piece of
This is the whole brat thing for those folks who don't really know. I can read it to everybody if they don't know what we're talking about. Or you want to explain it, Martha?
Well, no, there was a lovely performer who was trying to explain the word brat, B-R-A-T, which is it's sort of a social term now to somebody who's real cool. And she first says, I'm cool because I was happy that Andrea Pizer, who is a journalist for the New York Post, I say in the movie, and I don't mention her name, right? You didn't hear her name in the movie.
Right.
I mentioned that she's dead, and I was happy that she was dead. Well, I wasn't talking about Andrea Pizer, by the way. And for why Andrea Pizer thinks it was her, I have no idea. But it was a little bit of sloppy fact-checking on the part of my team on the documentary. It was Constance L. Hayes, who is an equally divisive and very dangerous journalist at the New York Times at the time of my trial.
Oh, my goodness. Martha, do you know, Martha, I used to sit across from Connie Hayes. Do you know that? You wouldn't know that.
She died, right?
I know she passed away from cancer.
And I'm sorry for her family. I'm sorry for her family, but I did not like Constance Hayes, and I did not like what she did to me every single day. I had to
covered the
read
trial,
that.
right?
It was horrible. And not very accurate, and not very true, and not very nice. And Andrea Pizer wrote the same crap that she always writes, but I wasn't talking about Andrea Pizer, and she should get off her high horse and not think that I was thinking about her for the last 15 years.
Martha, we were looking at home. Good to see you. We were looking at home through the for the recipes, and I'm just wondering, do you have? We want to do some of them, and then I was thinking, let's say Snoop has a certain predilection for wanting something really sweet, or I don't know, something he'd really like. Were there any really good recipes in there for someone that might like that? I would like something
he would
like
infused is what he's talking about. Infusions.
Infusion.
The apple crumb pie for Thanksgiving is a must. And use as many different kinds of apples as you can. It really changes the texture and the taste of the apple pie.
Wait, can you top it with gummies, Martha?
No,
That's where I
gummies.
think Joe is going with
No,
this.
this is after you've already, and then you get.
After you've already partake, and then you can have the pie.
Yeah, and the entire, you know what? The whole book looked good for that, actually. I'm going to, apple.
Turkey. Don't forget the parchment turkey. That's a new recipe. It takes the place of my cheesecloth turkey, but the turkey comes out so deliciously. So if you're looking for a new turkey recipe, try that one.
And you won't blow the house up or get covered in like grease. I'm scared of doing those other things with the turkey. This is a safe way to.
It's the cleanest way I've ever cooked a turkey. It's really
is it parchment wrapped instead of foil?
Yeah, you wrap it after you stuff the turkey and butter it nicely. Then you wrap it in big sheets of parchment paper. You can use a staple gun or the bulldog clips from your desk, and roast it in the parchment. And then about a half hour before it's finished, you unwrap it, and it gets this beautiful, beautiful mahogany brown color. It's fabulous.
And that's the alternative to using foil, because now we have all these questions about wrapping.
Oh,
stuff
no
in
foil. I never cook with foil. But
I'm a new convert.
Cheesecloth is very good. You don't have to wrap your food in foil.
Perfect.
Martha Stewart on her 100th book. It is great to see you again, and we hope to see you in person soon. Thanks, Martha. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks so much. And your program is so good this morning.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that's Squawk Pod for today. Thanks for listening. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernan, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Tune in weekday mornings on CNBC at 6 Eastern to get the smartest takes and analysis from our TV show right into your ears. Please follow Squawk Pod wherever you get your podcasts. That's it. We'll meet you right back here tomorrow.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.